Some stories leave you speechless, others stay with you forever. In this video, we dive into the most disturbing and heartbreaking cases where children became the victims, or the perpetrators. From miraculous escapes and unresolved disappearances to kids who committed shocking crimes. This is the dark side of innocence.
Eerily calm, Randy walks through the store, shotguns ready. The details of what happens next are debated, as the news accounts differ from what one of the employees says happened. I'll tell you all of it so you can make up your own mind, but be warned, what happens next is terrifying.
Social media has given rise to a new era of criminals who can't resist the urge to broadcast their heinous acts for all to see.
I'll give you exactly what you deserve, all of you.
Trey Cesler was just another teenage boy when he first started his YouTube channel LensCap Productions. He uploaded funny videos like his sketch about a landlord trying to collect rent from some bizarre roommates. But as time went on, his content took a darker turn. Cesler's interest in guns and gore began to seep into his videos, and he started creating fight scenes that involved swords and firearms. In a video entitled Mr. Anime is Planning Something, Cesler announced that he was going to take a 3-week break from YouTube to reward himself.
I'm going to reward myself with probably a 2 or 3 week break.
But he never said what he was planning. It was an unsettling video, and it seemed like his subscribers were right to be worried.
I have more views than ever, and everything is going really good.
But something that changed in Cesler. He seemed unhinged, and his videos became more erratic and bizarre. He started posting videos about conspiracy theories and made several disturbing comments about his mental state.
I'm in the United States, as many of you probably know, and we're not liked by a lot of other countries, which makes me feel somewhat uncomfortable. However, I am comforted by the strategic position that the nation has.
And then, on March 20th, 2012, Cesler committed a heinous crime.
Carvings were found on the walls and doors with confessions, such as, "Why did I do this? I love my mum, dad, and brother. God forgive me, because I cannot forgive myself."
He murdered his own family, including his parents and brother, leaving regretful messages on the walls of their home. Cesler had planned to carry out a mass shooting at a nearby high school, and he did not want his family to live in shame because of his actions.
I would protect them with my life, but at the same time, if anyone was going to hurt him, it was going to be me. And I fire about 4 times, and I don't know where she gets hit, but I know it's somewhere in the torso area, and she falls like a ton of brick. They were the first immediate human targets in my sight, and if I was going to go out and do anything, they would have to go.
Cesler's behavior leading up to the killings was reportedly disturbed, including spending hours online researching serial killers and engaging in drug use. He is now serving his time in prison without any possibility of getting parole. Randy Stair was a man of disturbing obsessions. His fixation on the Nickelodeon animated series Danny Phantom had consumed him to the point where he felt compelled to act out his twisted fantasies.
Randy was obsessed with the Nickelodeon cartoon Danny Phantom, which follows the adventures of main character Danny Fenton, who became a human-ghost hybrid after an accident involving the portal between the human world and the ghost zone.
But what's even more chilling is how he chose his victims. Stair reportedly flipped a coin to determine who he would kill. Born in 1992, Randy Stair was raised in Dallas, Pennsylvania. He spent most of his childhood in isolation, preferring to spend his time alone rather than socializing with other children. As he grew older, Stair developed an interest in animation and began creating his own cartoons. He even started a YouTube channel called Ember's Ghost Squad, where he posted his animated shorts. But as time went on, Stair's content took a dark turn. Stair's obsession with the show turned into an unhealthy fixation, and he began to see himself as a character in the series. He even adopted the persona of one of the show's characters, a female named Ember McLean, and started referring to himself as her.
He even played his fantasies out in real life, making Twitter profiles for the 8 main EGS characters he created, all of them talking to each other frequently, when in reality, it was Randy himself pulling all the strings.
But it wasn't until June 8, 2017 that Stair's obsession turned deadly. On that day, Stair walked into the Y Supermarket in Tunkhannock, Pennsylvania, where he worked as a stock clerk.
It was a completely silent video of him just giving a tour of the supermarket that he worked at.
Armed with 2 shotguns and a handgun, Stair began shooting at his co-workers, killing 3 of them and injuring another before taking his own life.
Okay, so here's the deal. Got a 1983 quarter right here. You believe in fate? Here's the fate test. I'm gonna flip this 3 times, or the best out of 3, rather. And if it's heads, I'll do it here. If it's tails, Supermarket.
According to reports, Stair flipped coins to determine which of his co-workers would be his victims. He also left behind a detailed manifesto outlining his plans for the massacre, including a list of his intended victims.
I went downstairs and his face was covered in blood.
Do you know what they were hitting him with?
A gun.
This is Samantha Wolfford, a small-time YouTuber who turned into a killer. The desperate need for fame drove Samantha to commit an unspeakable crime. Samantha's videos talked about her passions, personal life, and struggles of being a young mother. But as her channel grew, so did her obsession with being famous.
What do you think of me making YouTube videos? Well, I guess I don't mind. Takes up a lot of time.
However, Samantha's husband, Ernest Ibarra, didn't share her enthusiasm for the YouTube world.
I'm not gonna light a cigarette.
Oh yeah, I forgot about it.
Because you got that f***ing iPad in your hands.
Where?
In fact, the two fought a lot over Ernest's gaming habits, which only added to the strain in their marriage. But little did anyone know that their differences would lead to a gruesome end. On the 20th of February 2015, Samantha's mother received a hysterical phone call from her daughter.
What is the victim's name? Samantha Wolfford.
Samantha claimed that the intruders had broken into their home and kidnapped Ernest. But as the investigation progressed, it was revealed that Samantha had played a role in her husband's disappearance.
I think you know exactly who did this, and I don't buy your freaking story for a minute. That's what I think.
During questioning, Samantha's story kept changing, leading investigators to believe that she wasn't telling the truth. And they were right. It was soon discovered that Samantha had conspired with 3 men to kidnap and murder her husband. Jonathan Sanford, Jose Ponce, and Octavius Rhymes were the men who carried out Samantha's plan. They kidnapped Ernest, beat him up, and later buried him in a shallow grave. The motive behind the murder was Samantha's desire to be rid of her husband, who she believed was holding her back from fame and fortune. After Ernie's body was found, Jonathan Sanford and Jose Ponce pleaded guilty to kidnapping and first-degree murder, each receiving 50-year sentences in April and December of 2016. Finally, in September 2017, Samantha Wolfford's trial for the same crime began, but her claims of medication-induced alteration were not believed by the jury, sentencing Samantha to 99 years in prison. Imagine being sentenced to jail for 18 years and then feeling happy about it. Believe it or not, but these were real emotions of Catherine Jones when she talked about how she and her brother Curtis Jones killed their stepmother at the ages of 12 and 13. Born in 1985, Catherine Jones was the first child of Curtis Jones Sr. and Stacy Parks. Within a few months of Catherine's birth, Stacy got pregnant again and gave birth to her son Curtis Jones Jr. For the world, they were a complete family of 4, but on the inside, things were really disturbing. Curtis Jones Sr. was a vicious physical abuser who would often beat Stacy for no reason. Even when Stacy was pregnant with Catherine, Curtis didn't stop. He hit her so hard that her uterus broke and she had to give birth early. From that day onwards, things started to get even worse to the point that Stacy had to leave her kids, fly to her parents in Kansas. For a few years, Curtis Jones Sr. and the kids lived happily until one day Curtis invited a male relative over to live in his house. This man took advantage of their mother's absence and would often sexually abuse the kids, especially Catherine.
I was the ultimate actress, a professional at being A+ student, social butterfly, perfect kid on the outside, while inside dealing with the pain of the sexual abuse that I was experiencing from the age 5 to the date of my incarceration.
When the kids reportedly told their mother, Stacy, what had happened, she immediately called the cops and an investigation was opened. The disturbing thing about the entire incident was that Curtis Sr. fully supported his relative instead of his kids. He told the child safety officer that it was a misunderstanding. During the investigation, it was also revealed that this relative had a history of petty crime and pedophilia. Even after this shocking revelation, the investigation was dropped due to a lack of evidence and the kids changing their story in order to be with each other. By 1999, Curtis Sr.'s girlfriend Sonia Nicole Spates also started living at the Joneses' house. She was a teaching assistant that had a bright and vibrant smile, but from the inside, she was just as monstrous as Curtis Sr. and his relative. She was aware of what was happening with the kids, but just like Curtis Sr., she didn't bat an eye. By this time, Catherine and Curtis Jr. decided they would do something about this and started planning to kill all the members in the house.
I was like a dormant volcano, one that erupted at age 13, resulting in me taking the life of an innocent woman.
On January 6, 1999, Catherine and Curtis Jr. began their attack. Curtis Jr. took his father's handgun and went straight to the dining room where Sonia was sitting. He went straight up to her and shot 9 rounds from the handgun until Sonia was no longer moving. She tried to grab her phone and call for help, but Catherine took it away from her and Sonia was left to die.
He was in the kitchen and I was sitting at the table. I already knew it was fixing to happen. We had already talked about it, and she was sitting at the other dining room table. And he shot her in the chest. And she tried to grab the phone and I went and took the phone.
After Sonia was no longer moving, Catherine realized that they were in deep trouble. She took the gun from Curtis Jr., emptied out the remaining bullets, wiped the fingerprints off the gun, stormed out of the house. The cops later on caught them in the morning at 7 a.m. and the two were put into prison. During the trial, their defense attorney put forward the child abuse cases from previous years, but that didn't do much for the siblings. The prosecution portrayed them as jealous little monsters in front of the court and the world. Curtis Jr. was sentenced to 22 years in prison as he pleaded guilty for murdering Sonia, and Catherine was sentenced to 18 years in prison for assisting Curtis. However, Catherine requested that her brother be granted the same sentence as her, which the court approved.
Curtis couldn't even comprehend what was happening, not to a true extent. Here's what he asked his child support officer.
And one of the things that, I wanted to know if he had any questions, and one of the things that he asked for was one of his Nintendo games.
Curtis had no idea what he was about to face in prison.
There's no way that these kids should have been sentenced as adults. They should have been sentenced as juveniles.
They became the first kids to be sentenced as adults instead of juvenile. Instead of taking care of them and providing them therapy, the kids were given the worst of all punishments. While in prison, Catherine married Navy Officer Senior Chief Ramis Fleming. She was released in 2016 at the age of 30. She is now a mother of 2 and is leading the campaign for fair sentencing for youth. Curtis Jones was released a year later and is now a Christian.
26 children and their bus driver kidnapped in the biggest mass abduction in U.S. history.
They buried the children and the driver alive 12 feet underground.
The Chowchilla kidnapping remains one of the most unique and shocking kidnap cases to ever occur. In the afternoon of July 15, 1976, 26 children from the Dairyland Elementary School were on their way home after a swimming trip in Chowchilla.
Just another average summer day, very hot, going to summer school.
The bus driver was Ed Ray. He was a strong, quiet man. Everybody liked Edward.
Suddenly, the bus was blocked by a white van in the road, and Ed was confronted by a masked man.
And then this man came up with a stocking over his head with a gun and said, "Open the door."
3 men armed with pistols and shotguns took over the bus and began to drive. Not far from Chowchilla, the gunmen hit the bus in a dry river bed and transferred their prisoners into 2 vans.
The vans had been converted into makeshift jail cells by installing wood paneling and even painting the windows. No one could see in or out.
For 11 hours, they drove in the sweltering heat. No bathroom breaks, no water.
Not knowing where they were going, both the children and their driver were terrified.
We drove what seemed like for hours upon hours upon hours.
Eventually, the bus stopped, and in the early hours of the morning, Ed and the children were forced down a ladder into an underground prison.
Before I knew it, the ladder was gone. They threw a rolled toilet paper down and said, "We'll be back for you."
They had been placed in a buried moving truck 12 feet underground. They were given a small amount of food and water, as well as a makeshift toilet before being abandoned.
It was just pitch black, like the dark was touching me.
Meanwhile, back at home in Chowchilla, the victims' families were distraught.
26 school children and their bus driver have vanished. Anguished parents, President Ford, hundreds of searching police are asking the question, where are the children?
At the present time, we know that there's 27 people missing since about 4:15 yesterday afternoon.
A huge manhunt began as the FBI arrived in town in huge numbers to begin a thorough investigation. Eventually, the children's school bus was spotted by a pilot overhead.
Just before sunset, a police pilot spotted the big bus about 7 miles outside Chowchilla, hidden in the dry riverbed.
Police expected to receive a ransom demand from the kidnappers, but none came.
So far, there's been no word from any abductors.
They desperately searched for clues on the school bus, not knowing that the children were buried 100 miles away in a rock quarry. After being in the hole for 12 hours, the small amount of food rations left by the captors were gone. The fans keeping the van ventilated had stopped working and the roof was beginning to cave in.
We were out of food, we were out of water. The roof was caving in, It just was a desperate situation.
Unwilling to die underground, Ed and the children began to plan an escape. The kidnappers had blocked the entrance hole with a manhole cover, placing dirt, truck batteries on top of it to prevent it from being moved. They also constructed a wooden box around it.
Everybody got the mattresses and stacked them up as high as we could go. People started standing on each other's shoulders.
Children began to work together to remove the manhole cover. Finally, 14-year-old Michael Marshall managed to remove the cover.
Once the manhole cover was moved, that box was just big enough for Michael to stand in.
Mike Marshall, actually, brave person that he is, crawled out of the hole first.
And I stuck my head out, and there was nobody. I didn't see anybody.
We saw conveyor belts, excavators. It looked like the Flintstones. And all these men with hard hats came to us and looked at us like, who are you?
Children were found by quarry workers in Livermore, California after digging themselves out of the underground prison.
14-year-old Michael Marshall and the bus driver piled up mattresses that were in the hole, and after 16 hours in darkness, they managed to dig their way to safety.
It is confirmed by the Alameda County Sheriff that the children have been found in a quarry.
Children were checked over and questioned thoroughly before being returned home.
They took us into what looked like classrooms. They brought us apples and soda.
However, after the children's rescue, their captors were nowhere to be seen.
Did they arrest the people who apparently are responsible? No, they are still looking for the captors of the children.
Didn't take long, however, for the police to track down their first suspect. Police searched the quarry and the van hoping to find clues. They soon decided that whoever carried out the abduction would have needed access to the quarry.
Fred Woods had keys to that quarry.
The quarry owner's son, Fred Woods, and two of his close friends, James and Richard Schoenfeld, were soon arrested. The arrests were met with great surprise and interest, as they were the last people that many would have suspected.
They're young, they're wealthy. I think it added a component of fascination to the story, because it was so unlikely that three men such as these would commit such an atrocious crime.
Police searched Woods' father's estate, covering mountains of evidence, including extensive plans to carry out the kidnapping.
They were going to ask for $5 million from the state of California.
It had been planned for months, but something had gone horribly wrong on the day.
Because of the number of calls that were coming in worldwide, the phone lines were jammed. They couldn't get through, so they took a nap. And by the time they woke up, they saw on the news that the kids had been found.
The three men were soon arrested and charged.
The kidnappers, all from wealthy families, were sentenced to life in prison.
Three men were aged between 22 and 24 while they carried out the offense. They spent between 36 and 46 years behind bars for their crimes before being released between 2012 and 2022. During the trial, they explained their actions.
We needed multiple victims to get multiple millions, and so we picked children because they're precious.
The long sentences were given due to the psychological damage inflicted upon their victims, who are still scarred from the event nearly 50 years later.
26 terrified children, some as young as 5, were staring down the barrel of a sawed-off shotgun.
Did they offer therapy to these kids?
You know, Gil, they took them to Disneyland because the thought was if we go to Disneyland and take a picture and you see Mickey Mouse and everything's great.
The 1976 Chowchilla kidnapping remains one of the most shocking kidnapping cases in U.S. history to this day. If it wasn't for the bravery and determination of Ed and the kids, it's possible that many of the children would have never made it home. Sauter Family Mystery. Fayetteville, West Virginia, Christmas Eve, 1945. George and Jenny Sauter are asleep when a raging fire engulfs the family home. They escape safely with 4 of their children, but tragically, their 5 other kids never make it out. What at first seemed to be simply a tragic accident ended up being considered one of the most unique and mysterious cases in American history. This is the mystery of the Sauter family. Strange things about the fire started to emerge when the house was still burning. In a desperate attempt to rescue his children, George Sauter attempted to get back inside the house. He went to find his ladder, which was not in its usual spot. After this, he tried to move his coal trucks to the house to climb on top of, but neither one would start. During the fire, Marion, one of the children who managed to escape, rushed next door to call the fire department, but there was no response from the operator. She tried another house, but again, nothing. Eventually, a neighbor rushed into town to tell the fire chief, F.J. Morris, about the blaze. Unbelievably, the fire department didn't arrive at the Sauter's house until 8 a.m., hours after the fire had begun. By this time, the house was a pile of ash. A closer inspection of the destroyed house, no bodies were found, not even bones. The fire chief suggested that the 5 children's bodies had been completely burnt, which seemed highly unlikely. George's wife Jenny would later speak to a crematorium employee who told her that even if you burn a body for 2 hours at 2,000 degrees, bones still remain. After the fire, it was decided that it had been caused by faulty wiring. However, George had recently had the wiring of the house checked, stating that the professional had deemed it safe. Jenny also claimed that she saw lights left on just before and during the fire. How could the lights have been on if the wiring had a fault? George and Jenny began to suspect that the fire was not an accident. Someone had deliberately started the house fire in order to kidnap their missing children. But why would anyone want to hurt the Sauter family? Some started to believe that someone in the community may have had a reason to hate George. Originally coming from Italy, George Sauter was a huge critic of Mussolini, a controversial figure still popular with some Italians in the community. George had also left Italy without much explanation, with some suggesting that he may have got caught up in some shady business back home, perhaps even with the mafia. A strange incident occurred a few months before the fire that may be a key in understanding what happened to the Sauter children. In the fall before the fire, an insurance salesman arrived at the Sauter household. When George told him he wasn't interested, the man erupted in anger. According to George, he said, "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed. You're going to pay for the dirty remarks you've been making about Mussolini." The identity of the salesman remained a mystery for over 2 years. However, in 1947, after finding no trace of their children, the Sauters asked the FBI to get involved, who accepted. Strangely, the local police and fire department refused their help. After this, the Sauters hired a private investigator called C.C. Tinsley. He discovered that the salesman who had threatened George before the fire was a member of the coroner's jury who had decided that the fire was an accident. George and Jenny Sauter were convinced that the fire had been deliberate and that their children were still alive, and the local police and fire department had covered the whole thing up. For years, the Sauters investigated reported sightings of their children. One woman in a town 50 miles west of the fire claimed that she served the children breakfast the morning after the fire. Another woman claimed to see the 5 children in a hotel a week after the fire. George even traveled to New York years after the fire after seeing a photo in a newspaper who looked like one of his missing children. But the children's parents refused to talk to him. In 1968, 23 years after the fire, Jenny received a mysterious photograph of a man in his mid-20s with a strange message attached. She believed that the photo could be of her son, Louis. The note on the back said, "Louis Sauter, I love brother, Frankie. Little boys A90132 or 35. A private detective was hired to track down the sender of the letter, but the detective disappeared and was never heard from again. George and Jenny never gave up searching for their missing kids. Over the years, they investigated numerous reports of sightings, all of which led to nothing. George and Jenny have now died. To this day, the mysterious case of the Sauter family is still unresolved. Some believe that George and Jenny convinced themselves that their children were still alive and they were unable to deal with the grief of losing them. Others believe that the mysterious circumstances surrounding the fire are clear proof that something more sinister occurred on that fateful night in West Virginia. It is likely that it will remain a mystery forever.